The keyring landed with a cold, definitive thud on the polished mahogany tabletop, a sound that somehow swallowed the entire room's oxygen. My father hadn't even finished his sentence when he slid it forward, his declaration about my brother, Leo, being the natural successor, still hanging in the air between us like cheap perfume. My mother's soft, approving hum vibrated through the silence, a sound more binding than any contract. I placed the signed power of attorney documents beside the keys with a calm I didn't recognize in myself, surrendering 10 years of my life, my labor, my silent stewardship, without a single word of protest. The heavy brass of the key fob glinted under the chandelier's light, a tiny, mocking sun. The room watched, holding its collective breath, convinced this was my moment of graceful defeat, my long-awaited capitulation. They saw a woman finally yielding the weight she was never meant to carry. What they couldn't see was the architecture I had built in the shadows, the silent fortress whose blueprint I carried in my mind. Leo's triumphant grin, wide and effortless, was already forming as his fingers brushed the keys. But when he finally read the letter I'd left for him, sealed in that simple navy blue envelope, that grin didn't just fade. It didn't merely waver. It shattered into 1,000 unrecognizable pieces. And the echo of that destruction was the only vindication I would ever need. End of hook 170 words. My childhood wasn't marked by playgrounds or birthday parties, but by the endless, shining linoleum of the Willowbrook Senior Care Center. My world smelled of industrial antiseptic struggling to mask the deeper, sadder scent of fading bodies and loneliness, with an occasional, tragic overlay of wilted carnations from the Weekly Volunteer. The fluorescent lights buzzed a constant, high-pitched dirge overhead, a sound so permanent it became the white noise of my youth. My father was a giant in those halls, not in stature but in presence. He moved with a commander's certainty, his leather solace clicking a rhythmic tattoo of importance. He knew every resident's name, their grandchildren's names, their favorite pudding flavor. He was beloved, a figure of compassionate authority. I was his shadow, struggling to keep pace. At 8 years old, I was tasked with pushing the linen cart, a hulking metal beast on wheels that I could barely steer. It would wobble and veer, threatening to topple towers of neatly folded towels. "Steady, Maya," he'd call over his shoulder, not breaking stride as he clasped Mr. Henderson's shoulder. "You've got to be steady for them." His smile, when it eventually found me, was distant, an automatic gesture like a porch light clicking on at dusk. It held no warmth, only a vague expectation of continued, silent service. Leo, 2 years my junior, never entered those halls if he could help it. When he did, he didn't shadow anyone. He seemed to bring his own light with him. The overhead fluorescents didn't flatten him. They haloed his golden curls. He had a laugh that was a clear, bell-like sound, cutting through the murmured sorrows of the place, pulling smiles from faces that hadn't smiled in weeks. My mother would materialize with her camera, positioning him by Mrs. Gable's chair, who adored him, or kneeling beside a blooming philodendron in the sunroom. My shining boy, the social media captions would read, "The future is so bright." In those carefully curated squares, I existed only as a blurred shoulder, a hand adjusting an oxygen tube at the edge of the frame, a ghost perpetually out of focus. I was the set dressing in the drama of Leo's destined brilliance. The narrative of our roles was written before we could read. Leo's potential was a family treasure to be excavated and displayed. He got the private piano lessons, the summer soccer camps in the mountains, the weekends in the city to visit museums and expand his horizons. I got responsibility. "Maya's our little old soul," my mother would tell her friends at book club, sighing with a performative mix of pride and pity. "So independent, so capable." They spoke of my independence as if it were a genetic trait, like eye color, rather than a survival skill I'd honed in the vacuum of their attention. It wasn't a compliment. It was an absolution of their own neglect. The disparity wasn't malicious, I told myself. It was just efficient. When Leo came home crying over long division, a university tutor was at our kitchen table by Thursday. When I brought home a perfect report card, my father would glance up from his financial reports, give a curt, satisfied nod, and say, "Knew you could." The expectation was its own form of praise, I supposed. A backhanded acknowledgement that I was the reliable one, the predictable engine of the household. Leo was the fireworks. I was the clockwork. One birthday crystallized the divide. For Leo's 12th birthday, my parents rented a community pool. There were 40 kids, a DJ, a cake shaped like a guitar, and literal fireworks that crackled against the twilight sky. The photos filled an entire album. My birthday, a mere month later, was a Tuesday. I came home from school to find a single grocery store cupcake, its white frosting grainy and sweating, on the kitchen island. A post-it note clung to the plate. "Happy birthday, sweetie. So proud of you. Don't forget your shift at Willowbrook at 5. Mrs. Finley is asking for you." I was 14. The shift wasn't about earning allowance. It was about covering for a call-out because we couldn't afford another penalty from the staffing agency. I didn't hate Leo. How could I? He was just a kid, basking in the warmth they showered on him. He didn't ask to be the sun any more than I asked to become the orbiting moon, visible only by reflected light. But I learned a fundamental, crushing calculus. My needs were an equation that unbalanced the family budget of emotional energy. Wanting anything, a new book, a ride to a friend's house, simply to be seen made me inconvenient. So, I became a master of erasing my own desires. I didn't just fold towels. I perfected a system for the linen closet that cut restocking time in half. I didn't just pass out medications. I memorized interactions and side effects, catching errors the overworked nurses missed. I became the girl who solved problems before anyone knew they existed. My value was a silent, functional utility. And in making myself utterly useful, I performed a magic trick. I made myself disappear. I became so essential to the machinery of their lives. I would realize much later that I rendered my own humanity invisible to them. This pattern hardened into the very bones of our family. Adulthood didn't break the mold. It poured new concrete into it. Leo, with my parents' enthusiastic funding and endless cheerleading, moved to the coast to pursue his art, a vague, romantic endeavor involving photography and freelance graphic design. His calls home followed a predictable pattern. Enthusiastic descriptions of his latest project, a subtle dip into his financial struggles, the gentle ask for support. The transfer notifications would ping on my father's phone before the call even ended. They sent the money with a kind of reverent joy, an investment in the masterpiece they were sure he was becoming. Meanwhile, the foundation of their actual world began to crack. My father's heart, stressed by decades of managing the fragile business, began to falter first. Then my mother's autoimmune condition, always lingering, flared with a vengeance. The senior care industry itself was shifting, with new regulations sprouting like thorny weeds and insurance reimbursements shrinking. Good nurses left for hospital jobs with better pay. The family business, Willowbrook, wasn't just struggling. It was gasping for air. And the person they turned to in the middle of the night, the one they called when the bank called them, the one who sat through the endless meetings with state inspectors, wasn't the golden child they'd invested their dreams in. It was me. I signed the durable power of attorney documents in a beige hospital room at 3:17 a.m. The vinyl chair was ice cold through my thin jeans. My mother, dwarfed by the mechanical bed, watched me with glassy, morphine-dulled eyes. As I handed the notarized pages back to the lawyer, she reached out a frail, papery hand. "You're so good with the hard things, Maya," she whispered, her voice a dry leaf rustle. It wasn't a testament to my strength. It was a sentencing. It confirmed my eternal role, the bearer of burdens, the handler of hard things, so they wouldn't soil Leo's capable, creative hands. Some nights, after a 16-hour day of managing the crisis du jour, I'd pause at the glass doors of Willowbrook. In the dark reflection, I saw a stranger, a woman with posture pulled taut as a wire, hair scraped back into a ruthless bun, a tablet held to her chest like a shield. I didn't see a 28-year-old. I saw a weary general on a forgotten battlefield. That was the night the final, clear truth dropped into place, cold and smooth as a river stone. In the gallery of my family's aspirations, Leo was the celebrated portrait, lavishly framed and spotlighted. I was the plain, load-bearing wall he hung upon. Unseen, uncounted, but remove me, and everything would come crashing down. The shift didn't arrive with a bang, but with a series of soft, almost imperceptible clicks like tumblers in a lock turning the wrong way. You don't feel the earth move until you look up and see the Horizon is no longer where it should be. The first sign was an email. For years, all communication from the State Department of Health regarding inspections, renewals, and compliance went directly to my inbox. One Tuesday morning, I noticed the usual weekly digest hadn't arrived. I checked my spam folder, then the main inbox again. Nothing. Cold thread of suspicion wound through my gut. I logged into the shared business account we used for official correspondence. There it was, the email, forwarded to Leo's personal address with a note from my father. Leo handled this. Good experience. I wasn't copied. My name wasn't mentioned. It was a quiet deletion from the loop. Then it was the quarterly financial review meeting with our accountant. I'd prepared the binders, as always, cross-referencing every line item with staffing logs and supply invoices. The day before the meeting, my father stopped by my office, a converted supply closet with a desk. Don't worry about the numbers meeting tomorrow. Leo and I are going to take a crack at it. You've got enough on your plate with the day-to-day. The phrase day-to-day felt like a diminishment, reducing a decade of systemic management to the equivalent of sorting mail. The meeting happened behind a closed door I wasn't asked to open. The most telling omission was the leadership transition strategy session, a grandiose title for what was essentially a dinner. I heard about it from Brenda, our head nurse, who popped her head into the medication room while I was doing an audit. Aren't you excited about the big dinner next week? She asked, her kind face puzzled. The one about the future. I saw the fancy invite in Leo's hand. I kept my expression neutral, the heat rising to my cheeks. Oh, it's just a formality, I lied smoothly. That night, a PDF invitation appeared in my inbox, not as a participant, but as a blind carbon copy, a ghost recipient, gold embossed script on a deep blue background, celebrating a new dawn. The legacy continues. My parents and Leo were listed as hosts. My name was nowhere. The physical proof came when I was in the cold storage unit, counting bags of saline. The chill bit through my sweater. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my mother, a photo. Leo, standing proudly in front of the freshly repainted Willowbrook sign. The late afternoon sun turning his hair into a crown of light. He looked confident, visionary. The caption beneath it read, "Our future, in capable hands." The next chapter is his to write. I stared at the image until the screen timed out and went black. My reflection a pale, ghostly overlay on the dark glass. In that moment, I wasn't in the chilly storage room. I was erased from the picture entirely, a figure scrubbed from the family portrait. That evening, I walked into the warm, fragrant chaos of my parents' kitchen. My father was sautéing onions, leaning on his cane with one hand, gesturing animatedly with the other to Leo, who was sipping a craft beer. And we'll rebrand the marketing entirely, Leo was saying. Make it more boutique, less medical, more holistic lifestyle. My mother sat at the island, her face softened by adoration, nodding at every word as if he were reciting poetry. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, a stranger in my own home, waiting for an acknowledgement that never came. Finally, my father glanced over, his smile casual, almost dismissive. Oh Maya, you're home. Listen, don't bother with all the regulatory paperwork this week. You've been carrying this place on your back for years. It's time. He turned back to the sizzling pan. It's time for Leo to take on the real responsibility. The big picture stuff. The words real responsibility hung in the air, toxic and heavy. All my years of work, of crises averted, of lives literally held in my hands, were relegated to paperwork. Leo offered me a sympathetic, almost patronizing smile. Yeah, take a break. Maya, you've earned it. He said it like he was granting me a vacation from a job he'd never understood. My mother reached out and patted my wrist, her touch light and final. You're our foundation, honey. You always have been. Foundations don't need to be in the spotlight. Let Leo be the face. Let him shine. Asterisk the foundation. Asterisk the metaphor was complete. I was the buried and seen concrete, dark and damp and functional. Leo was the gleaming spire everyone admired. I said nothing. My throat had sealed shut. I simply nodded, my fingers gripping the edge of my tablet until the plastic casing creaked in protest. Later, after a dinner where the conversation swirled around Leo's vision and fresh energy. I found the binder. It was left conspicuously on the dining table, as if for my review. Inside, in Leo's sprawling, optimistic script, were projected financials and growth initiatives. The numbers were a fantasy. He proposed cutting redundant nursing hours by 20% to fund a wellness concierge service. He budgeted for a rooftop garden but hadn't factored in the structural engineering, reports or ongoing maintenance. He projected a 15% increase in private pay residents while our entire region was seeing a decline. It was the business plan of a tourist who'd read a pamphlet about healthcare. And in the bottom right corner of the executive summary, my parents had both signed their initials with a proud, flowing script. Their blessing was absolute. The decision was not just made, it was celebrated. I sank into a chair. The wood let out a soft, tired sigh. I looked at those pages, at the cheerful, ignorant arrows pointing ever upward, and I waited for the rage to come. I waited for the tears, for the hurt, for the decade of pent-up injustice to finally roar to the surface. But it didn't. Instead, a profound, eerie calm descended over me. It was the quiet of deep space, the stillness at the center of a storm. The emotional noise that had been my constant background hum, the need for approval, the hope for recognition, the ache of unfairness simply switched off. In its place was a crystalline clarity. Looking at their fantasy plan, I didn't see a betrayal. I saw a blueprint for failure. And I realized, with a chill that was not fear but focus, that I no longer had any interest in preventing it. A faint, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in months. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a mathematician who has just found the elegant, simple solution to a problem that has plagued her for years. I didn't correct a single number. I didn't point out the regulatory impossibilities. I didn't list the 3 times I'd saved Willowbrook from bankruptcy. The pandemic protocols I wrote that became a county model. The midnight negotiations with union reps. I closed the binder with a soft thump asterisk, placed it back exactly at the center of the table, and walked upstairs. Each step on the staircase felt lighter, as if I were ascending from deep water toward the surface, shedding a world of pressure with every movement. The weight I'd carried wasn't mine. I had just never been allowed to put it down. My childhood bedroom was a time capsule. The lilac walls were faded, the posters of forgotten bands curled at the edges. I sat on the bed, the same chenille spread from my teens, and listened. From downstairs drifted the sound of Leo's laughter, bright and assured, punctuating my father's low, proud voice. They were already toasting their future. A future built on the assumption that my silent support was a permanent, immutable feature of their world, like gravity. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dark room. I created a new folder. I didn't name it Revenge or Justice. I named it Continuity. Then, I opened a blank document. No headers, no emotional salvo. Just a blank, white field. And I began, not to build a case, but to document an existing empire, one they had never seen. The work was not creative. It was archaeological. My first document was a forensic timeline, a 10-year excavation of my own life. I didn't write sentences. I cataloged events with the dispassionate detail of a lab report. *Q for 2013, State Survey, 12 deficiencies. Wrote and implemented corrective action plan in 72 hours, avoiding probation. Dad hospitalized for 14 days during this period. Leo studying abroad in Florence. March 2020, pandemic declared. Drafted infection control protocols from CDC guidance before state mandate. Sourced PP through non-traditional channels when supply chains failed. No outbreaks at Willowbrook for first 18 months. Leo moved home during lockdown. Contributed by designing hopeful window posters. Each entry was a stone I had carried, now laid out in a cold, undeniable path. The second file was the architecture of the invisible kingdom. I didn't own the bricks of Willowbrook, but I had built everything that made it function. I listed the state licensure numbers, their expiration dates, the specific conditions tied to each. I copied the master vendor contracts for food supply, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, all negotiated by me, all with performance clauses and personal relationships I maintained. I detailed the partnership agreements with 3 major hospital systems for post-acute care transfers. Agreements that specified my name as the primary clinical liaison. I compiled the policy and procedure manuals, all 400+ pages, every one written in my clear, precise prose. This wasn't just paperwork. This was the operating system. The buildings were the hardware. This was the proprietary software that made them run. The third file was the human ledger, names, the stern state inspector, Janet Colfax, who told me last year, "I only trust your reports." They're the only ones that don't try to hide the ball. Dr. Evans at City General, who texted me directly about potential admissions, because he trusted my clinical judgment over the hospital's own case managers, Brenda, the head nurse, and 6 others who had stayed through the worst times because I fought for their hazard pay and listened to their fears. The daughter of Mr. Jacobs, who hugged me weeping in the parking lot and said, "You were the only one who treated him like a person at the end." This was the institutional trust, the social capital. It didn't follow the property deed. It followed competence. It followed me. I didn't need to fabricate a single fact. The power was already there, scattered across hard drives, filing cabinets, and memory. My entire adult life had been one long, silent act of creation. All I had to do was compile the portfolio. The next morning, before the sky had even thought of lightning, I drove across a sleeping city. The streets were empty, washed in the sodium orange glow of streetlights. I parked outside a modest brick building with a discreet brass plaque. Eleanor Vance, Esq, Elder Law and Nonprofit Trusts. A single light glowed in an upstairs window. Mrs. Vance, who had handled my grandparents' estate and had always looked at me with a knowing, sad clarity, opened the door before I knocked. She wore a silk robe over her pajamas. She didn't ask why I was there. She simply stood aside and said, "The kettle's just boiled." Her office was a cozy cave of law books and potted ferns, smelling of peppermint tea and parchment. I laid the 3 files on her wide, oak desk. She put on her half-moon glasses and read in utter silence, her face an unreadable mask of professional assessment. The only sound was the turning of pages and the distant coo of morning pigeons. She read for 20 minutes straight. When she finished, she removed her glasses and looked at me, not with pity, but with a fierce, sharp respect. "They are planning to transfer a title," she stated flatly, "but they are confusing the frame for the painting." I nodded. "And you are no longer interested in being the frame?" I nodded again. She tapped my timeline with a bony finger. "This isn't about emotion. It's about asset protection. You don't want revenge. You want a trust." That single word trust was the keystone. That afternoon, she summoned her associate, Robert Finch. He was a man of quiet, immovable presence, his suit perfectly pressed. At 8 a.m., he reviewed my documents with the speed of a scanning machine, his eyes missing nothing. When he saw Leo's financial projections appended for context, a muscle twitched in his jaw. "The operational ignorance here," he said softly, "is a liability of staggering proportions." "They think they're giving him the keys to a car," I said, my voice steady in the quiet room. "They don't understand the car has no engine without these." I pointed to the licensure documents. "They think they're giving him the keys to a car," I said, my voice steady in the quiet room. "They don't understand the car has no engine without these." I pointed to the licensure documents. "Precisely," Finch said. He arranged the papers into 3 neat piles. Physical assets, he touched the property deeds. Intellectual and operational assets, his hand hovered over the licenses. Manuals, contracts, goodwill and institutional capital. He indicated the partnership, agreements and the list of key relationships. The first can be transferred with a signature. The second 2 are not necessarily tied to the first. They are, in fact, the valuable part. He explained it with the patience of a teacher. We would create a non-profit, charitable trust. Its purpose, to safeguard the continuity of care models and operational standards for senior services. It would hold the intellectual property, the care protocols, training systems, compliance frameworks I'd built. It would hold the licensing approvals in its name as the managing entity. It would formalize the partnerships. The trust wouldn't *own Willowbrook the building. It would control what made Willowbrook a licensed, functioning care facility, not a mere apartment building. Aegis Trust, I said. The name came to me fully formed. In myth, the Aegis was the protective shield of Zeus. It was defense. It was stewardship. It was a barrier against chaos for those under its guard. Appropriate, Finch said, a flicker of approval in his eyes. We structure it so the trust licenses its systems and its name to the operating entity. The operator, whoever that may be, must meet the trust's standards to maintain the license. The legal machinery began to hum. Using the authority of my power of attorney, which was still fully valid, uncontested, and legally rock solid, I executed a series of transfers. I transferred the operational licenses to be held by the newly formed Aegis Trust. I assigned the copyright of all policies, procedures, and training materials to the trust. The vendor contracts and partnership agreements were amended to name the trust as the party of interest. Each document was signed, notarized, and filed with the cold precision of a surgeon. It was administrative, it was boring, and it was utterly revolutionary. My parents, in their focus on Leo's grand ascension, saw only routine paperwork. I brought them documents to sign, explaining they were administrative updates to streamline the business structure for the transition and protect personal assets from business liabilities. They signed where the yellow tabs pointed, smiling absently, their minds on party menus and seating charts. They were given the honorary, unpaid title of founding advisors to the trust. They signed that, too, pleased with the recognition. They never read the bylaws that gave them no voting power. They never saw the clauses that made the trust's assets irrevocable and separate from the property. They received a gold-embossed title. The trust retained all actual control. The work took 3 weeks. When it was done, I returned to my daily rounds at Willowbrook. Nothing appeared changed. I walked the halls, reviewed medication charts, soothed a worried family. The staff greeted me with the same respectful nods. They knew nothing of the seismic shift that had occurred in a county clerk's office. They only knew I was still there, the calm at the center. Leo, meanwhile, began his immersion. He followed Brenda around with a notebook, asking questions like, what's the core feeling we want families to have? He spent hours with a graphic designer, debating logos. He turned a spare office into a vision space, with mood boards featuring words like authentic and curated care. My parents visited, arm in arm, and beamed at every paint sample he showed them. They saw creation. I saw decoration. The night before the Legacy Gala, the culmination of their fantasy, I sat in my utilitarian office. The buzz of the fluorescent light was a familiar drone. On my screen was one final document, a letter to Leo. It contained no emotion, no recrimination. It was an operator's manual for a machine he didn't know existed. It stated, plainly, what the Aegis Trust was, what it held, and what his ownership of the physical properties now meant. It outlined that his right to operate them as care facilities was contingent upon a licensing agreement with the trust, subject to annual review against the standards I had encoded. I ended not with a threat, but with a simple, factual transfer of accountability. Asterisk, the sustainability of this operation now depends on your understanding of these systems. The responsibility is yours to learn. Asterisk. I printed it, folded it into crisp thirds, and sealed it in a navy blue envelope. The color of depth, of stability, of the deep sea where light doesn't penetrate and only structure survives. On the morning of the gala, I placed that envelope in my simple clutch purse. I added the physical keys to both Willowbrook facilities. I added a copy of the power of attorney documents that had started it all. 3 objects, 3 silent testaments. This time, I would not step in. This time, I would let the world. They had chosen a world of surface and symbol collide with the world I had built. A world of structure and substance. I would let the silence after the impact tell the whole story. The gala was a masterpiece of illusion. The Willowbrook event space, usually filled with the gentle clatter of bingo tiles, had been transformed. Soft, glowing candlelight replaced the harsh fluorescence. Round tables dressed in ivory linens and crystal centerpieces reflected a warm, romantic sheen. A string quartet played something tasteful and soaring in the corner. The air smelled of braised short ribs and expensive perfume, a world away from the familiar scents of bleach and oatmeal. Everyone who was anyone in our small world was there: local business owners, the mayor, board members from the community foundation, our most prominent families. They had come to witness a coronation. My parents stood near the makeshift podium, radiating a vitality I hadn't seen in years. My father stood a little straighter, his hand resting protectively on my mother's lower back. She was glowing in a new silver dress, her eyes shining with tears of pride. They looked like the cover of a magazine about successful second acts. Leo held court beside them, looking every inch the visionary, heir in a tailored suit that probably cost more than a nurse's monthly salary. He chatted easily, shaking hands, throwing his head back in that practiced, charming laugh. He accepted compliments on the fresh energy he was bringing with a humble nod that was perfectly calibrated. I took a seat at a table near the back, beside Brenda and a few of the night shift nurses who'd come in on their night off. I was wearing a simple black dress, my hair down. I received a few polite, distracted smiles. I was part of the scenery, the reliable administrator in the background, exactly where I was supposed to be. My father finally tapped his spoon against his water glass. But gentle asterisk ting 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 asterisk cut through the murmur, and the room settled into an expectant hush. He cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. Friends, family, cherished members of our community. Thank you. Thank you for being here on this most special night. For over 30 years, the care of our seniors has been this family's calling. Our life's work. He paused, looking lovingly at my mother, who pressed a hand to her heart. That work has always been about family. And tonight, it is with the greatest joy and confidence that we look to the next generation of that family to carry the torch forward. He turned to Leo, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. The spotlight of attention focused to a laser point. My son, Leo, has vision, passion, and a deep, modern understanding of what compassionate care can be. He is ready to lead. So tonight, we formally celebrate his ascension to leadership of the Willowbrook family. The future is bright. The room erupted in warm, sustained applause. Cameras flashed. My mother dabbed at her eyes. Leo raised a hand in modest acknowledgement, his smile brilliant and sure. I waited. I let the applause crest begin to wane, and then taper into the soft clinking of cutlery as people prepared to return to their meals. In that moment of transition, I pushed back my chair and stood. The movement was not dramatic, but in the settling quiet, it was conspicuous. A few heads turned, then a few more. The chatter at nearby tables died down. I felt the weight of dozens of eyes, most of them confused. I walked the few steps to my parents' table, my steps measured and silent on the plush carpet. Without a word, I placed the 3 items from my clutch onto the empty space of white tablecloth in front of me. First, the heavy ring of facility keys. They landed with a solid, metallic asterisk clack asterisk. Then, the folded power of attorney documents, edges crisp. Finally, the navy blue envelope, standing upright like a solemn, dark sentinel. The table fell utterly silent. My father's smile faltered, then reformed into a puzzled, paternal expression. "Maya, sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying in the new quiet. "That's a lovely gesture, but it's not necessary tonight. This is Leo's moment." I looked at him, then at Leo. My face was calm, a still pond. I slid the keyring across the smooth linen toward my brother. "It's all yours," I said, my voice clear and level, carrying to the surrounding tables. A few guests made soft, understanding sounds, mistaking it for a sister's symbolic blessing. Others, perhaps those with sharper business sense or keener eyes, fell completely silent, sensing a rawness in the atmosphere, a drop in pressure. Leo, playing his part, gave me a magnanimous, slightly condescending smile. He reached for the keys, then his eyes flicked to the blue envelope. Curiosity, or perhaps a performer's instinct to engage with every prop, made him pick it up instead. "What's this?" he asked lightly, for the benefit of the audience. "Your well wishes." He slid a finger under the flap, broke the seal, and pulled out the letter. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the first few lines with a patronizing readiness to be touched. His expression of performative interest froze. His eyes, which had been skimming, suddenly snapped back to the top of the page and began moving with frantic speed. The color drained from his face, leaving 2 spots of high, sharp color on his cheekbones. He flipped to the second page, his movements becoming jerky. A soft, involuntary sound escaped his lips, a sharp intake of air stuck in his throat. "What?" he whispered, the word not reaching beyond our table. "What is this?" He looked up at me, his eyes wide and uncomprehending, then back down at the paper, as if the words might have rearranged themselves. He shook his head slightly. "No. These numbers. This can't be right. No. These numbers. This can't be right." His voice rose, thin and freeing. "This is a mistake. Maya, what is this? This is a joke." The last word came out too loud, a cracked note that sliced through the remaining dinner conversations. Every head in the room turned now. His chair shrieked against the floor as he shoved back from the table and stood up, the letter crumpling in his fist. "Tell me this is a joke," he demanded, his voice now full-throated with panic and anger. The room was a tableau of frozen shock. My father's paternal confusion morphed into alarm. "Leo, what is it?" He stood, reaching for the papers. Leo thrust them at him, his hand trembling. My father smoothed the pages, his eyes racing over the text. I watched as his face underwent a terrifying transformation. The pride, the vitality, the warmth, all of it drained away, leaving the ashen, slack face of an old man. His hands began to shake so violently the paper rattled. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow with a betrayal so profound it bordered on disbelief. "Maya," he croaked, "what have you done?" My mother, sensing catastrophe, snatched a page from his trembling hands. Her eyes darted across the lines, her lips moving soundlessly. This says the licenses, the systems. We don't own them." Her voice was a high, desperate whisper. "It says they belong to a trust. The facilities are real estate," I said, my tone as calm as if I were discussing the weather. "Brick, drywall, and plumbing. The right to operate them as care homes belongs to the Aegis Trust. You own the shell. The trust owns the life inside it." A wave of horrified murmur swept through the room. This was no family squabble. This was a corporate implosion playing out over the salad course. From a shadowed corner table, Robert Finch stood. He had been invisible, just another guest in a suit. Now, as he walked forward with deliberate calm, he became the only steady point in a tilting room. He stopped beside our table and addressed my parents, his voice respectful but unyielding. "Everything in that letter is factually and legally correct," he began. 18 months ago, during the period when Maya held full, uncontested power of attorney for both of you due to your health crises, she executed a series of asset transfers for the purposes of business continuity and liability protection. The intellectual property, operational licenses, and key partnerships of the family business were placed into a newly formed charitable trust, the Aegis Trust. You both signed the documents establishing the trust and naming yourselves as honorary advisors. We didn't know. My father erupted, his voice breaking. We would never have agreed to this. You were represented by counsel at the time, and the documents were explained as necessary restructuring to safeguard the business during your incapacities. Finch replied, his tone unchanging. Your signatures are notarized. Finch replied, his tone unchanging. Your signatures are notarized. The trust structure is legally airtight. Leo found his voice a ragged, lost sound. So what did you just give me? He asked, looking from my parents to Finch. Finch turned his steady gaze on him. You have been given title to two aging properties and responsibility for their mortgages, maintenance, and property taxes. The right to use those properties as licensed senior care facilities is granted via a revocable license from the Aegis Trust. That license is contingent upon maintaining strict operational standards, staffing ratios, and care protocols as defined by the Trust. Failure to meet those standards results in license review and potential revocation. She can learn the standards, my mother cried, clutching my father's arm, her eyes pleading with me. Leo can learn. He's smart. Finch lifted a single sheet from his own folio. The trust bylaws are clear. Should the operator in this case, Mr. Leo Reynolds, deviate from the mandated care protocols, fail a state inspection, or allow staffing levels to fall below the agreed-upon safety minimums, the trust board can vote to terminate the license with 60 days' notice. Without that license, the properties revert to residential zoning only. They cannot legally function as care facilities. The finality of it landed with a physical weight. My father seemed to shrink into his suit. The grand leader was gone. So, he said, the word a shattered exhale. We have nothing. I said nothing. They had exactly what they had always prized, the appearance, the title, the spotlight. They had the picture frame. I had quietly removed the priceless painting it once held. Leo slumped back into his chair as if his bones had dissolved. The letter slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor. The golden boy was gone, replaced by a stunned, lost young man staring into a chasm of responsibility he had never bothered to understand. I thought. He mumbled to the tablecloth. I thought I was being given something real. I finally met his gaze, holding it across the ruins of their celebration. You were, I said, and my voice, for the first time, held a whisper of something like pity. You were given the work, the weight, the reality. You just never had to lift it before. Finch closed his folder with a soft, definitive click. The purpose of the Aegis Trust is not punitive. It is protective. It exists to ensure the residents and staff of these facilities continue to receive the standard of care that has been meticulously built, regardless of who holds the property deed. It is a structure for continuity, not a weapon. My parents stared at me, and in their eyes, I saw not anger first, but a dawning, horrified comprehension. They were not looking at their dutiful daughter. They were looking at a strategist, an architect, a legal entity. They were looking at the wall that had held up their world, and realizing, too late, that it had a will of its own. I offered no explanation, no apology, no reassurance. I simply turned, my movement crisp and final, and walked toward the exit. The silence that trailed behind me, thick and stunned, was more powerful than any standing ovation could ever have been. I did not sleep that night, but the insomnia was not born of guilt or racing thoughts. It was the profound, almost deafening silence of a pressure valve finally released. For the first time in my adult life, the psychic weight of their expectations, the constant, low-grade hum of what needed to be fixed, managed, anticipated, and carried was gone. The house itself felt different. The walls seemed farther apart. The air felt lighter, easier to breathe. My phone, which had been a permanent, buzzing extension of my hand for a decade, sat dark and silent on my nightstand. No pre-dawn texts about a sick caregiver. No midnight emails from an anxious family member. No calendar alerts for inspections or medication renewals. The silence wasn't empty. It was spacious, clean, and entirely my own. By mid-morning the next day, the consequences of the previous night began to manifest, not in my world, but in the one I had left behind. I observed them from a distance, like watching a storm through a very thick, very soundproof window. I heard from Brenda, who texted me a simple, bewildered, holy cow. Maya? The sirens just went off here, I didn't ask for details. I knew the sequence. The first bank emails would have arrived, questioning the changed operating entity on the accounts. Seasoned staff, nurses like Brenda who had stayed for me, would have handed in notices, unwilling to work under an unprepared, fantasy-driven owner. The first warning letter from the Department of Health would have landed, a routine inquiry about the license transfer that Leo would have no idea how to answer. The chaos was theirs to manage. The responsibility had been placed, with ceremony and celebration, squarely on Leo's shoulders. My only role was that of a spectator. Yet, habit and a deeper, truer sense of purpose drew me out before dawn a few days later. I drove not to Willowbrook, but to the new Harborview assisted living community on the other side of town. It was a modern, single-story building designed to feel like a lodge, with large windows facing a protected wetland. The Aegis Trust, as the license holder and systems provider, had been contracted to manage it. I was its part-time operations consultant. The windows of Harborview glowed with soft, amber light against the indigo pre-dawn sky. Inside, the morning shift was beginning with its gentle, human rhythm. I saw Carlos, the activities director, setting up chairs in the sunroom for a morning stretch class. In the kitchen, The soft clatter of breakfast preparation was a comforting, domestic sound. In the common area, an old man was already sitting by the piano, his gnarled fingers picking out a hesitant, sweet melody that drifted down the hall. This was the work, stripped of the dynastic drama, the familial baggage, the crushing weight of legacy. This was just care, just systems functioning to support life. This was what I had built the trust to protect. I walked into the small, sunlit office that had been set aside for me. It was plain, with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a window that looked out on a bird feeder. The morning light poured in, painting everything in soft gold. I set my bag down on the chair and stood for a moment, just breathing. Then I exhaled, a long, slow release. The sound in the quiet room was the settling of a final, immense weight. It was the sound of a chapter closing so completely that the echo simply vanished. A week later, I had to go to the county office to file some trust paperwork. In the crowded, brightly lit waiting area, I saw them. My parents. They sat on linked plastic chairs, holding each other's hands, staring blankly at a wall-mounted television playing a silent news loop. They looked small, older than their years, folded in on themselves by a confusion they couldn't articulate. The vibrant force they'd been at the gala had evaporated. They didn't see me walk past. I didn't stop. There were no words left. The bridge was not burned. It had been quietly dismantled, plank by legal plank, and the river of business and responsibility now flowed between us, wide and uncrossable. There was nothing left to fix because the thing that had been broken, their understanding of my role, was not something I could repair. It was something they had to comprehend, or not on their own. A month after that, I was doing a routine quality assurance visit at a small affiliated memory care home. As I walked through the secure garden, I saw him, Leo. He was there not as an owner, but as a new, low-level volunteer. A requirement subtly suggested, by the terms of the aegis, license to gain operational understanding. He was slowly pushing a woman in a wheelchair along the paved path. Her head was bowed, and she was talking softly, incessantly, about a childhood home that no longer existed. Leo's head was bent toward her, listening. His movements were careful, hesitant, utterly lacking his former glib confidence. The spotlight of being the chosen one was gone. He was just a young man in a volunteer vest, doing a difficult, simple, human task. He didn't see me. I watched for a moment, then turned and walked away, leaving him to the moment, to the work, to the reality he had inherited. Some stories end with a dramatic victory lap, with the underdog raised up and the villains vanquished. Mine did not. Mine ended with quiet, not the quiet of defeat, but the quiet of a finished equation. It ended with space clean, clear, and earned. For the first time in my life, I was not carrying a single ounce of a burden that belonged to someone else. My shoulders, my mind, my schedule, my future, they were finally, unequivocally, my own. There was no epic confrontation afterward, no tearful reconciliations, no shouted accusations, no lawyers at dawn. There was just a line, drawn not in anger, but in the calm, indelible ink of legal and emotional truth. It was a boundary, and boundaries, once firmly established, don't need to be argued. They just exist, like a property line or the shore of a lake. Families can explode with the noise of shattered plates and screaming voices, but the most permanent boundaries form like geology through slow, immense pressure, and then a final, quiet settling. They are silent, immutable, and they reveal the true shape of the landscape once all the loose debris has fallen away. My strength was never in the final confrontation at that gala. My strength was in the 10 years of work that preceded it. It was in the silent building of something so real, so structured, so necessary, that when I finally stepped aside, it continued to stand, and the hollow facade they cherished could not. The victory was not in taking something from them. It was in finally claiming what was always mine, my labor, my intellect, my peace. Freedom, I discovered, doesn't always look like triumphantly winning the game. Sometimes, it looks like calmly setting your pieces down on the board, rising from the table, and walking out of the room without a backward glance. Finally understanding that you were never really a player to begin with. You were the one who built the board. And sometimes, the most powerful statement you will ever make is the one you deliver without uttering a single word. The silence that follows, if you have built your truth well, will speak volumes forever. CTA 500 words ***. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever felt like the invisible glue holding everything together, the reliable one everyone takes for granted, the scaffolding supporting someone else's spotlight, then I need you to do one simple thing right now. Look at the screen and hit the like button. That single click is not just a thumbs up, it's a signal. It tells the YouTube algorithm that ***Wines of Thought** is a channel where powerful, meaningful, human stories live. It tells the platform that there are people here who crave depth, who understand the quiet battles, who recognize the strength in strategic silence. Your like pushes this story out from the shadows and helps it find its way to others who might need to hear it. Someone else who is carrying a weight that isn't theirs. Someone else who is realizing their own power is in what they build, not in what they are given. This channel is built on the belief that our most profound lessons come from navigating complex emotions and impossible situations. Stories like this one are our shared language, but this only works if we speak that language together. Your support is the quiet engine that makes this entire community possible. It's what allows me to keep finding and sharing these narratives of boundaries, of quiet resilience, of finding your voice by choosing your silence. So, please, take that half second. Smash that like button. Subscribe to ***Wines of Thought** if you haven't already. And turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Because more are coming. More tales of quiet reckonings, of invisible strength, of the moment the foundation decides to speak for itself. And I want to hear from you. This story is about the boundaries we finally draw. So in the comments below, I have a question pinned for you. What was the moment you realized you had to build a trust around your own life, a structure to protect what you had built from being taken for granted? Let's talk down there. Your stories are what make this more than just a monologue. They make it a conversation. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of ***Wines of Thought***. Remember, your quiet support is never invisible here. It's everything.